so much for coming. I'd like to welcome all of you, and let's give a round of applause to our speaker development team.
Thank you very much for this warm welcome. Thank you, Sarah, for all the good things you said about me. And thank you, Deacon Michael and George, for all the work you put to bring me here. So it is quite an honor and a great feeling to be in this space. I really love the location of this school and also its focus. I thought I could start this discussion by sharing with you a couple of intuitive experiences that I've had. We all have those experiences. We sometimes don't pay much attention to them. But in my case, they were transformative. In what sense? Well, what comes to my mind is an experience that I had as a graduate student. I was struggling very hard to write my doctoral dissertation, and I wasn't getting it right. I had a lot of good material, but I did not have a theoretical framework to put everything together. And unless you have that, you cannot write a dissertation, which means that I could not have finished my degree. So I was struggling several weeks, and the ideas were not coming to my mind. So it was, I remember, midnight in somewhere in the middle of July. And I decided to give up and go and sit in the middle of campus. I went and sat on a bench. It was starry night. I looked up and I saw the stars. And then a hippie came and sat next to me. And guess what he was doing? He started smoking. He was smoking, I was inhaling. Passively. And as we were doing that, we were talking about the universe. We were looking at the stars. And then all of a sudden, it was as if there was a flash of insight that came into my mind. And I saw my dissertation written with the theoretical framework as it should be. I was so excited, I felt like running on campus screaming, Eureka. And I couldn't wait until the next morning to go and tell my advisor what I had in mind. So I found him in the morning, we went and, in a coffee shop, and on a piece of paper, I presented the design of how my dissertation should proceed. He approved it, and that's what led to the dissertation, which eventually ended up as a book. And that started my career. Now, this is an example of what intuition can do to us. And it is happening to us all the time. It was not just a hunch that it was accidental. It was as if something gave me my dissertation written in my head. And then I went and wrote about it. I had the structure presented in this flash of insight. So this is what I tell my students sometimes. When you write your papers, when you are assigned a paper, don't wait until the time the paper is due to work on it, because you are using only a very small portion of your mind, the conscious part. And you are not really marshalling all your God-given powers to attain the goals that you have in mind. So begin working very early and open a file and throw in whatever ideas come to your mind, read whatever books you have to read, and then as you go through it, you will be surprised how many insights you will get at the time that you least expect it. But unless you put the work, unless you put the energy, you are not going to get these insights. The ancient Greeks used to say, "Sin Athenake Hyragini," meaning if you want Athena to help you, you have to work yourself also. So there is this kind of connection between our inner intuitions and our rational mind. And if we live only on the rational level, we are really missing utilization of the greater portion of our mind. I have so many examples that I can give you about this, not only from my own experience, but also from what I've read. And I was pleasantly surprised to hear that you have been discussing this issue for some time now, so I am eager to learn from you also. Because academics do not pay much attention to this issue, because we have only focused on developing the rational mind and our empirical ways of studying the physical universe. So the person really that influenced me enormously about this issue was the founder of the Harvard Sociology Department, Peter Sorokin, who was a Russian emigre, a survival of the Russian Revolution, and he was sentenced to death there because he was secretary to Kerensky, the interim president, and they were getting ready to execute him, and one of his former students intervened with Lenin and implored for Sorokin's life. So Lenin said, who is this obscure so-and-so, and get him out of jail. So they let him out. So here is this man who was expected to get executed the next morning, and now he is free. Not only that, but he was given his position back at the University of St. Petersburg, now Leningrad University, as a sociologist there. Well, he had an opportunity to leave the country. He came to the United States and started the sociology department at the University of Minnesota. He learned English very quickly. He was really a genius who has never been to school, by the way. He grew up as a boy, a peasant boy in northern Russia. His father was an icon builder, and the family was moving from village to village, so he never had an opportunity to go to a regular school. So he was self-taught. But his father had a problem. He was an alcoholic, and at a certain point he chased poor Sorokin. He was 12 years at the time, with an axe, and injured him on his face. So he and his brother decided to abandon their father. Their mother had already died. And they were doing the job that his father was doing to make a living. Eventually he ended up in the city, and he met someone that took a liking of him and introduced him to the university. He prepared himself for the entrance examination, and he went straight to the university. He passed the examination, he got a doctoral degree there, he ended up being a professor of sociology and criminology at the University of St. Petersburg. So this is, in a nutshell, his story. He came to the US after making a big name at the University of Minnesota. Harvard invited him to start the sociology department in 1932, I believe. Why do I mention his name? Because he made an important, he was very important in me shifting from being a thorough secularist and skeptic, as I was being trained as a sociologist, to open myself to the possibility that there is more to reality than what is accessible through our physical senses and through our rational mind. And how did I, speaking about intuition, as a graduate student, I was taking a course in sociological theory. And this was a seminar, and we, the students, had to write on a major thinker and present the material to class. The professor gave us something like 12, 15 names, and it was first come, first served. In other words, he gave us a couple of weeks to explore who we want to study, and then we'll go and tell him who he decided to report on. So I had in mind, in giving a report on the big names in sociology, of Max Weber, of Emil Durkheim, Karl Marx, the big names in sociology. So when I went to see my professor, he said, I'm sorry, but all these names have been taken. I said, well, who is left? He said, Pitirim Sorogin. I said, who? Pitirim Sorogin, he said, and the other one was some other not very central name. So I had to study Sorogin. Here it is, how things work out in our lives. Well, the more I read about Sorokin's life, the more I got excited. And what was the thing? Not only his life was so fascinating. In fact, I think that if somebody like Steven Spielberg wants to write a magnificent epic story, he could have Sorokin as the central figure. The reason why I was excited was also because of what he was teaching. He was a very different kind of a sociologist. He was a sociologist with a perspective that brought the intuitive aspect of knowledge at the center of his sociology. Remember, this was during the 30s and 40s, and during the height of the Nazi war, the Second World War. So what did Sorokin say that excited me so much? He said that we as human beings do not only have the conscious part of the mind, as Freud said, and the unconscious. Remember Freud divided the mind into the conscious and the unconscious? Is that human beings also have a supraconscious, which is the source of true creativity. And he claims that through science we access the physical world. We get to know how the world works, the physical world. So we have invented science to give us this kind of knowledge. And through philosophy and mathematics, we develop knowledge that is accessed by the rational mind. The supraconscious, he said, is the source of intuition. The source of intuition that can give us true knowledge of ultimate reality. Ultimate reality, I have a hunch, in fact I'm almost convinced about this, that Sorokin was familiar with the Startsi of Russian Orthodoxy. And he could see that many of these people had certain developed abilities that could not be reduced to some kind of material kind of interpretation. So to me that was quite an insight, that somehow there is such a thing as the supraconscious. And Sorokin was saying that intuition, he said, is a source of knowledge, not a kind of knowledge, okay, you have a hunch that may happen haphazardly, and then you go into the scientific laboratory and you explore and see if your hunch is right on the mark. He's saying that the source of knowledge that comes from intuition at the highest level is direct knowledge of ultimate reality. The mystical illumination of the great saints is a form of intuition. And this is what, here is what he's saying. There is hardly any doubt, he says, that intuition is the real source of real knowledge, different from the role of the senses and reason. It is especially indispensable in the apprehension of those aspects of true reality which are inaccessible to the senses and to reason. In other words, it is not just a hunch, you have an intuitive hunch, and then you go and get real knowledge in the laboratory. But it is something sui generis, in and of itself. The important and often indispensable role played by intuition in the cognition of true reality explains the perennial fact of the immortality of religion and arts, and the domination of the truth of faith over long periods. Sorokin, based on his understanding of the mind and history, claimed that in fact, secular civilization has reached its zenith of development, and it is collapsing, and we are moving in a different direction. So during the Second World War, he was prophesying that in fact we are moving into an age of the resurgence of spirituality, an age of faith. Nobody thought that way at the time. In fact, the general understanding of most of social scientists about the future is that religion was on the way out, that religion was a remnant of medieval ways of thinking, and that eventually it will fade away because it will be taken over by science and rational philosophy. That was the dominant, this is the typical secularization thesis that was taken as a cardinal truth by most psychologists, sociologists, philosophers of the early 20th century. I think you know what I am talking about. Let me read you a few more things about what Sorogin has said in reference to this idea of the supraconscious. Here is what he's saying in one of his books. Side by side, he said, with the subconscious or unconscious and conscious levels in human personality, a third stratum, the supraconscious, is gaining increasing recognition. It is gaining increasing recognition today, actually. When Sorogin was writing that, one would wonder where did he get that notion that this idea is gaining recognition. But in fact, it has been gaining, and in the late 60s, there was an offshoot of psychology that has not been paid much attention to, that is based on this notion that there is such a thing as realities of cognition over and beyond the rational mind. In fact, the founder of American psychology, William James, you know William James? At Harvard, there is William James building, and it's housed by the Social Relations Department, I believe. Well, William James thought that psychology was going to be the study of intuition. And he had experiences of his own. It is not accidental that he wrote that book, The Varieties of Religious Experiences. He was really studying mysticism, basically. And he believed that eventually psychology is going to move in the direction of developing the study and the development of intuitive abilities of human beings. But somehow psychology moved in the opposite direction. It was co-opted by positivism, behaviorism, and now we have at MIT, if you go there, I haven't seen it, but somebody told me that outside of the psychology building, there is a statement saying that we are committed to the study of the mind, to the study of the brain. That mind and brain somehow are equated at MIT. In other words, consciousness is confined within the brain. And that's not what William James had in mind as the founder of sociology. And this is not what Sorogin is saying here. So here is what Sorogin says further. It is not the subconscious or unconscious, but the supraconscious energies that are beginning to be considered as the real source of all great human creations, discoveries and inventions in all fields of culture, science, philosophy, laws, ethics, fine arts, technology, politics, and economics. You study the life of the great geniuses in history, and you'll find intuition being at the center of their work. From the discovery of penicillin to the law of gravity and so on. Such phenomena, here is what he's saying, such phenomena as extrasensory perception, you've heard the term, phenomena such as extrasensory perception and psychokinesis, meaning that mind having an impact on matter, something that now there are experiments showing that in fact something is going on there, that we are not really cut off from the physical universe, that even the physical universe is embedded with mind. This is really St. Gregory Palamas stuff. Really, that's where I want to come later on to show that Orthodox spirituality, Orthodox mystical theology has a lot to offer to the modern understanding of reality. And then we can talk about why it is not happening. So here is what, so psychology, as the supraconscious religious experience of the great mystics, as precognition, as the so-called calculating boys or arithmetical prodigies. Have you seen Rain Man? Now that was based on a true story. Where did that underdeveloped mind, he couldn't add 2 and 2, right? But he was able to, in his mind, it was like a computer. He can calculate things that a mathematician would take him many, many days to figure out. Where does that come from? Okay. As the state of samadhi of the yogi, or the satori of the Zen Buddhist, or cognitive and creative intuition are neither subconscious nor unconscious, but supraconscious, and as such are not reducible to the lower forms of vital and mental energy. This is an incredible statement because he was so far ahead of his time in reference to this issue. So that's why Sorokin made such a tremendous impact in the way I was thinking, and he left a kind of a window in my mind not to be completely swallowed up by materialism. Because the dominant perspective in our textbooks, if you take any perspective, whether it is any field, whether it is in physics, in chemistry, in biology, in sociology, in all the other humanities and social sciences, the underlying assumption is that this is the only world there is, the physical world. And we can call this reductionism. We reduce everything to the physical level. And along with this, what I call the syndrome of modernity. Okay? So reductionism is one aspect of this syndrome of modernity. The other is, of course, positivism. The only way to know the world is through an experimental science. There is no knowledge outside of the walls of the academy in laboratory experimentation, right? Which means that such a thing as intuition is a fantasy. It does not exist. That's the implicit assumption of this syndrome. Relativism. We learned from anthropology that all truth is relative to culture and times. There are no truths that transcend what has been constructed by society. Right? And at last there is the fourth element of this reductionism, of this syndrome, is determinism. That we as human beings are nothing more than the sum total of our genes and our cultural condition. No spirit as such, right? There is no supraconscious, in other words. This is what has led a lot of people towards nihilism, or nihilism. What's the right pronunciation? Nihilism, right? This is the predicament of modern consciousness. But I do believe that we are in the midst of a massive revolution in consciousness that will make the Enlightenment, the 18th century Enlightenment, look like a kid stuff. And this will happen, I believe, by reintroducing the study of intuition at the highest level of our cultural life, which will create a reorientation of our way of dealing with the world. And I would dare say that this reconciliation is going to bring science and religions together, not the enemies of one another. That in my own understanding, I think these are gifts that come from higher sources, and we are utilizing them either positively or negatively. I pointed out that I see a reconciliation taking place between science and religion. And I think Sorokin would have nodded with approval in terms of what I'm saying here. And why am I saying that? What kind of empirical evidence, if you will, do I have to make that statement? For one thing, as Sorokin would have said, all the great mystical traditions around the world throughout history have these intuitive powers that are embedded in every human being, is the source of all, or at the core of all the great civilizations. Look at every civilization, whether it is Jewish, whether it is Christian, whether it is Buddhist or Hindu or ancient Greek, you find that there were some individuals who were having ecstatic experiences, and those ecstatic experiences were translated into the culture and the history that they happen to find themselves in. So, if we look at a Jewish civilization, let's say, who provided the foundations of that civilization? The great prophets. Who were the great prophets? They were the great intuitives of that time, right? Whether it was Moses, whether it was Abraham, whether it was Elias, all the great prophets. When we come to Christianity, we find that the life of the great saints, starting from Paul all the way to the present, they have these deep intuitive experiences that offer knowledge of a different sort, from a different level. This is what Sorokin is calling, using this neutral term, the supraconscious, right? So this is something that I don't think anybody can deny, that at the very foundations of all civilizations is intuition. The great, and intuition has different levels, of course. There are the intuitions of the great saints, and there are the intuitions that we all have in our lives. Right? Another factor that I see as leading to this reconciliation between religion and science is that science today, in fact, becomes a major ally of religion. Now, why do I say that? Changes that happen on the macro level in our understanding of the cosmos. Until the middle of the 20th century, the majority of people thought that this universe was always there, the steady state notion of the universe, that it's a brute fact, and don't waste your time to explain how it was created, because it was never created. It was always there. But what happened during the 60s? You see, the 60s was a major turning point in the history of the world. With all its upheaval, there were also major breakthroughs in our understanding of the cosmos. You must have heard about the Big Bang, right? Well, the Big Bang is something that when it emerged during the 60s, some astrophysicists were making fun of it. That's why they called it, what is this Big Bang? Big Bang meaning that it's this original explosion that created the universe. Well, today it is the consensus of all astrophysicists that the universe was in fact created 13.7 billion years ago. Does that perhaps support what was said in Genesis? That there is a starting point, in other words. And then you begin to reflect. How did all this dust that were created out of this original explosion create this magnificent, stupendous universe? I was sitting having coffee with my wife in Orno. We love to go to a cafe there. It's like a hub. And then a colleague of mine in the astronomy department comes in, David Patuski. He discovered a galaxy, so his name is in the Guinness Book of Records. So I said, Dave, how many galaxies are out there? And he said, well, he said, based on our estimates, at least 100 billion. 100 billion galaxies, at least. And each of these galaxies have billions of stars like our own. Right? Can you fathom this? Now, until the 30s, we thought that the universe was the Milky Way. And all of a sudden now, we are talking about billions and billions of galaxies. Doesn't you feel like kneeling down and praying when you contemplate this fact? And guess what? I'm sure you all know that these 100 billion plus galaxies are only 3% of the estimated universe. What is the other 97%? Nobody knows. It's called dark matter. So, this kind of magnificent expansion of our awareness raises some very important questions. As far as we know, we are the only self-conscious beings that raises these questions. So we, as human beings, started this evolutionary process 13.7 billion years ago, and all of a sudden here we are asking and reflecting about the nature of the universe. Now, as you can see, I consider evolution as a fact of the universe and not some kind of a fantasy. In fact, the Pope accepted evolution. I was talking to Father Maximus about it, and he said, of course, that's the way God works in the universe. So this obsession that we have in our society about evolutionism versus science, these are false dichotomies. And unfortunately, it originated in the early part of the 20th century with the Stokes case. Okay, that is one change that is happening that raises questions in reference to the relationship of religion and science. The other is what is happening on the micro levels. As we are discovering the infinity of outer space, we are also discovering the infinity of the subatomic level, the micro level. Quantum physics. What is this quantum physics? When it did come out as a new theory, Einstein objected to it because it somehow undermined his understanding of the universe. And when one of his colleagues invited him to go and look at the laboratory, the microscope, to see what is happening on the subatomic level, that somehow particles there cannot be confined within cause and effect kind of relationship. Einstein made the famous statement, God does not play dice with the universe, because there was this kind of chaos, quote unquote, on the subatomic level. Once these things began happening, then we discovered that somehow this is not solid matter. It is solid because we vibrate on the same frequency as this. So this raises questions about the relationship between our thoughts and matter. What do scientists concluded? They found out that on the subatomic level, a particle will behave like a particle if the scientist expects it to behave like a particle. If you expect it to behave like a wave, it will behave like a wave. And somebody at the Princeton engineering department, Schmidt was his name, I think he's still alive, he made an experiment, he set up an experiment showing that human thought can affect the behavior of particles. What does that tell us? That we are not so completely cut off from the world around us. That what permeates the universe is consciousness. Right? Now, that's why I mentioned the name of Saint Gregory Palamas earlier, because what did he say about God? How can we know God, he said? By uniting with God's energies. And these energies are embedded in every particle of matter. So really, this matter is mind stuff. To use the Orthodox language, I would say that this is a manifestation of the divine, a manifestation of God. That there is no particle of matter that is outside of God's grace. There are experiments showing, in fact, today that suggest that, in fact, ultimate reality is consciousness. That it's not matter, but the complete opposite. This is precisely what Sorokin was saying about intuition. You probably have heard about the work of Raymond Moody. How many of you have heard that? Raymond Moody, have you heard of his work, Life After Life?
Yeah.
So you all know who I'm talking about. He's a very nice southern guy. He was professor of philosophy at the University of Alabama. Then he went to study medicine. He wanted to become a physician. And as a physician, he noticed that certain phenomena were taking place that needed attention. What were those phenomena that attracted his attention? That some people who were defined clinically dead, they came back and they were telling the doctors things that they should possibly know. Since they were clinically dead, their minds showed no evidence of activity, their hearts stopped. And then they come back and they talk about the experiences during that comatose state. So Raymond Moody decided to study this phenomenon. And he started interviewing people who had those experiences. And to his great surprise, some of them knew things that the doctors were saying among themselves as they were signing the death certificate about their death. That somehow they were outside their bodies and they were observing what was going on the physical level. There is a case of a woman who was dead, in quotation marks, and her consciousness, she didn't know she was dead. She went into the hall and she saw her brother-in-law talking to somebody else. And he heard him saying, I was planning on going to Athens for a vacation, and my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law is dying, so I had to come here and cancel my trip. So when the in-law came to see her after she came to her senses, the first thing she said to him, John, next time you have a vacation in Athens, just go. Don't expect me. How did she know that? What was happening to her consciousness? What am I driving at? Science today gives us enough evidence that we may exist as fully developed personalities outside of the physical body. Now, these are not beliefs. These are well-documented scientific studies. That's why I'm saying that today science is becoming an ally to religion and not the enemy of religion, as we have known all along, as we have been taught all along. Right? This is exactly what Sorokin was saying in the 30s, and it is happening in our time. I've met Raymond Moody several times, and we had some wonderful conversations. You can Google his name and you'll see all kinds of studies about his work. So the question that we need to raise is, how do we relate to all this material that is coming out in science as Orthodox Christians? That is something that we can discuss in the groups, because we can't say that these things are not real. And I don't think we can easily reject them as not being within the context of our own understanding of the world. But I think we need to reflect on these new insights coming from science and bring our collective consciousness at the higher levels of understanding and spiritual awareness, right? So this is one example of how science is now opening up possibilities for religion. The other thing is research that comes from phenomena like remote viewing, distant mental influence, telepathy, precognition. These are intuitive abilities of the soul, I would argue, that are now being recorded scientifically as real. And I have an article here of Russell Tuck. I don't know how many of you may have heard of his name. Anyway, yes. The reality of ESP. A physicist's proof of psychic abilities. I will never call it proof, but he claimed that there are, Russell Tark was he has been a researcher at NASA and worked for Lockheed. Anyway, he is a pioneer in the study of this phenomenon, or of remote view, distant mental. And in this little article, he vows that the evidence is so overwhelming that this phenomena take place that only ignorant people would refuse them as realities. Okay. So, what does that mean? It means that we as human beings are more than what we appear to be. And this is where I believe we can bring together the best of science and the best of religion, in our case, Orthodox spirituality, that can shed insights into this phenomena and bring them within a higher level of understanding. Now, there are people who, another factor that I want to point out is that in my field research, I have met people who have these extraordinary abilities. Therefore, I personally do not need the scientists to come and tell me that this phenomenon will take place. Before I met Father Maximus, and who turned my life around, and I spent the last 20 years studying Mount Athos and the intuitives of Christianity, let's put it this way. I started earlier in the previous decade through an accidental encounter of an intuitive who had certain abilities that really blew my mind. And when I met him, I said, my God, this is exactly what Sorokin was talking about. He had all these abilities that Sorokin referred to as psychokinesis and telepathy and so on. Just to give you a simple example. Somebody from New York wrote me a letter. Actually, he called me on the phone. And he said that my wife is having some serious problems, and the doctors cannot identify what the problem is. And I wonder whether you can take a picture of my wife to this healer that I studied in Cyprus. And maybe he can identify what the problem is. I thought it was a joke. I said, sure, I'll take the picture. So I took the picture because I was going to Cyprus that summer. And I gave it to him. He closed his eyes and he started rubbing the picture, and he said, the problem of this woman is in her teeth. All her teeth are full of infection. And she has to go to a doctor and have them all taken care of. I said to him, do you expect me to write a woman 7,000 miles away to go and take out her teeth because you're saying that? He said, do as I tell you, that's the problem. Well, I wrote an apologetic letter and I said, this is what he's saying. I came back to the States. After a month or so, I got a letter, I got a call from this same individual. And he said, you know, do you remember that case that we talked to you about? I said, yes. I do. I did take the picture and I wrote you a letter. Yes, we did get your letter, but we thought it was nonsense and we threw it away. I said, I don't blame you. He said, but you don't understand, he said. After a week, my wife's front teeth exploded and infection was dripping from the holes. So she went to the doctor. Her source of the problem was her teeth. And then the symptoms went away. How on earth, what is the probability that it was just an accidental hunch? Or was it that he was able to intuitively see that? And I've had many, many cases like this. I took Leonard Doob from Yale University. I was his assistant in bringing Greeks and Turks together on the island to find some solution to the problem there. And he was concerned. He was a mainstream psychologist. He had 18 books published. He was professor emeritus at the time. And he was like a figure to me. And he was really concerned that I was wasting my time with these guys, like the one that I just mentioned. I said to him, why don't you come? Why don't you come and meet him? And he said, well, I am a psychologist. I should be interested in this phenomenon. I said, of course you should. So we go to him, and we have a couple of hours of very interesting conversation. And then as we were moving out, he says to him, by the way, professor, you have an infection on your liver, and I suggest that you never drink from now on, because, and he told him what the problem was, hepatitis type B, I believe that was. He said to me, what is he talking about? I just had a physical and I'm perfect. I said, I have no idea. And anyway, he was laughing and he said, professor, he said, your psychology is at its infantile stage. I said, here is this guy who has finished only high school, who is telling the professor of psychology from Yale, with 18 books in his background, professor, your psychology is at its infantile stage. We come back to the States. He in New Haven. And after 3 months, he calls me up. He said, do you remember what that healer of yours told me? I said, yes, I have it on tape. I can send it to you. He said, well, I went to the doctors to have my physical, and the doctors found hepatitis type B. And I told them what this healer told me in Cyprus, and the doctor said impossible, because there was no medical instrument that could have identified the virus in your liver, but the virus must have been there because it takes it 3 months to incubate. The next summer, Leonard was back in Cyprus asking questions. How did you know all that? And Daskalos was telling me at some point that's how they used to call it. There is this rush of understanding, he said, that you can have, that comes into your mind, that it would take a scientist many years of research to find out. In fact, speaking about that, another episode comes to my mind. We were talking about the problem of AIDS. It was in its heyday at the time. It's all that dreadful disease, he said. When I was in Keshasha, after the invasion of Cyprus, he went to there and worked as a bookkeeper to a Cypriot who had a grocery store or a bakery. And I saw people dying from this dreadful disease. And I have a feeling, he said, that this disease came from monkeys, from sexual intercourse between monkeys and human beings. I said, how do you know that? Why do you say that? He said, I noticed, he said, that the vibrations of these people who had that problem had the same vibrations as some monkeys that I saw there. I said, well, that's very interesting. A week later, I bought Newsweek, and there was a story of a Harvard professor of medicine who claimed that they discovered that the virus came from the monkeys, the AIDS virus. But he could not have possibly been in contact with the Harvard professor to tell him that this is what is happening. So he had all these unusual kind of abilities that really blew my mind. The ambassador of Germany had some problems with his wife, and they didn't know what the problem was. The doctors could not identify what the problem was. So somebody who knew that I was doing this research said, why don't you take this, the ambassador? We had to go incognito because here it is ambassador of Germany there. Well, maybe I should not have said it publicly. An ambassador. And we went to his room, and they started talking. He said, where have you been ambassador besides Cyprus? And he said, in Japan and in Turkey. And I said, well, you know what happened? He said, you got a virus, you and your wife got a virus from Japan, and then a virus from Turkey. The two together created a new virus. They got stuck in your intestines, and no instrument could identify it. No, they don't know yet how to deal with it. But I'll give you a recipe, and it will help you. So he gave him a kind of a concoction. He said, yogurt with parsley, lemon, and honey. Beat them up and eat them for 10 days, and it will wash the virus away. I think that was the recipe. Well, after 10 days, we got a call from the ambassador that their problems went away indeed, and they invited us to their home for dinner, for lunch actually. So I have seen firsthand this kind of intuitive, that is why I was ready to go to Mount Athos. I would not have gone to Mount Athos had I not gone through Sorokin and this healer that I studied in Cyprus. When a friend of mine said, come to Mount Athos if you want to meet real saints, I was reluctant. I said, what am I going to do to Mount Athos? It's too far away. And what am I going to do with monks spending all their time contemplating their novel? I had that prejudice still in my mind. You see, if Sorokin rescued me from reductionism and materialism because he had the credential as a sociologist to offer a different interpretation of reality. During the 70s, I became skeptical of my skepticism. And that was the time, at the end of the decade, that I met this individual, Laskaros, who I saw firsthand what it means to have this kind of extraordinary intuitive abilities. I can go on and tell you all kinds of other abilities, but we don't have the time now. Had I not done that, I probably would not have gone to Mount Athos. And yes, I was freed from this skepticism that was dominant during my graduate education. And I was more open to spirituality, but I still was prejudiced against organized religion. I thought that real spirituality was somehow outside of the established churches, that somehow the established churches are stuck in the Middle Ages, and therefore humanity has to move forward. Until this friend of mine said, well, why don't you come to me to Mount Athos? I will introduce you to some real saints. And that was a turning point. Speaking about intuition, we went to Mount Athos. I was reluctant to go there. And the first monastery that I stepped my foot on, I met Father Maximus. He was the Archontaris. Archontaris is the guest master. So we connected very, very well. I mean, he happened to be a young Cypriot monk. He was 32 at the time. And then as we were walking and talking, I said, by the way, I heard that there is a hermit up here. And I was taught by our priest in Bangor, Maine, the Orthodox priest there at the time, he said, if you go to Mount Athos, go and see if you can see Elder Paisios. At that time, I would go to church on occasion, Christmas, Easter, maybe on some Sunday, but I was not an active participant of the church. I would go to church because I was Greek, and that's where I would meet Greeks and listen to the chants and so on. But I was not really very engaged with the praxis of Orthodoxy. And Father Maximos was a turning point for me. So when I asked him about Elder Paisios, he said, well, he's one of my elders. And I said, can I meet him? And that's when I had the opportunity to meet Elder Paisios. We had to walk for hours to get there. And my impression at the time was he was like an icon, like a saint that came out of the icons. He had that aura about him. But he had something that I didn't know that saints had, a fantastic sense of humor. I mean, he made us laugh so much. I said, my God, he beats even Johnny Carson's. So that was the beginning of my Orthodox career, in the sense that Father Maximus introduced me. I was so impressed with his knowledge and the goodness of his heart and the oozing of so much love that I found in Mount Athos and among people like Elder Paisios and Father Maximus. So I never thought that I was going to write any books about him. But here are these coincidences that happen in our lives and we often don't pay much attention to. I was asked by a friend of mine from the University of Minnesota to be on a committee to advise the Cyprus government about social research, to promote social research on the island. The stipulation was that we had to be on the island twice a year, during breaks, Christmas, and it was an offer I could not refuse, because I could have a free trip to Cyprus and stay there, see my folks, and it so happened that Father Maximus was asked to leave Mount Athos, and he ended up in Cyprus as an abbot, and every time I would go there, I would visit him at the monastery until it dawned on me that there is enough material here for a good book. And when I had my sabbatical, I went to the monastery. He allowed me to spend time with him. I became his chauffeur. I gathered the material and wrote the Mountain of Silence, which eventually led to the other two books that followed me. That's how I gathered the material. But all of these things happened as a result of unusual coincidences that peppered my life. And I'm sure if you look into your past, you will feel the same way. How you met your spouse, how you ended up doing something rather than another. I became a sociologist because I bumped into a sociology major, and I was fascinated with the conversation that we had. And then I said, oh my God, I'm in the wrong field. I came here and I was getting my first degree in business administration. And then I was desperate that somehow I discovered that I was in the wrong field. And then I went into graduate school in sociology as a result of other kinds of coincidences. So what I would like to suggest is that these are some brief overview of what happened to me and some of the ideas that I share now. I do believe that we are entering into an age of spirituality, as Sorokin claimed in the 30s, and that I think that Orthodoxy can play an active role in this reconciliation between science and religion. And I think, unfortunately, about Orthodoxy, we are not, to use a crude language, we don't know how to market our product correctly, to make it more accessible to the rest of the world. Because I think the teachings of the great saints is the connecting glue between this material that I mentioned, that happening in science, and the mainstream. Obviously, the world is not going to become orthodox, but at least we can become active participants in bringing about this new enlightenment. since the beginning of the 20th century, a lot of intellectuals, a lot of writers and poets that were later suffocated with the dominance of rationalism and positivism and empiricism, where did they go to find an outlet? They went to Buddhism or to Hinduism, not to Eastern Orthodoxy, not to Christianity, because of the problems that preceded the relationship between modern culture and religion. Just before I came here, I was surprised when I had a chat with a colleague of mine from the psychology department. Her husband is also a psychologist teaching there. And I thought her husband was a thorough behaviorist. His research are with mice. Here is the tragedy of psychology. That we study animals in order to understand the human psyche. Completely the opposite of what William James had in mind. And he said, my husband is into Buddhism. I said, what? He said, he spends his time meditating, reads, he has become a Buddhist. And here is this guy who is also an empirical scientist. And this is a typical kind of response when people want to escape positivism and materialism. They go to Tibet or they go to the ashrams of India. It is time, I believe, that orthodoxy can play a role so that people can find in the Orthodox tradition a way of making sense of what is happening all around them.